fear has a goal for you. And if you were to kind of go through and understand what its goal for you is, and you'd find that the goal for you would be incredible success. The goal it would have for you would be to have a massively positive impact on the people who you can serve with this project.
Heroes are an inspiring group of people. Every one of them, from the larger-than-life comic book heroes you see on the big silver screen to the everyday heroes that let us live the privileged lives we do. Every hero has a story to tell. The doctor saving lives at your local hospital, the war veteran down the street who risked his lives for our freedom, the police officers and firefighters who risk their safety to ensure ours. Every hero is special and every story worth telling, but there is one class of heroes that I think is often ignored. The entrepreneur, the creator, the producer, the ones who look at the problems in this world and think to themselves, you know what, I can fix that, I can help people, and I can make a difference. Then they go out and do exactly that by creating a new product or introducing a new service. Some go on to change the world, others make a world of difference to their customers. Welcome to The Hero Show. Join us as we pull back the masks of the world's finest heropreneurs and learn the secrets to their powers, their success, and their influence, so you can use those secrets to attract more sales, make more money, and experience more freedom in your business. I'm your host, Richard Matthews, and we are on in 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome back to The Hero Show. My name is Richard Matthews, and for today we have a very special episode for a couple of reasons. First off is this is our first returning guest interview with Dr. Nic Lucas. Are you there, Nic?
Yeah, I am. Hey, how you doing?
Awesome. So glad to have you here. If you guys remember his episode from last year, it was we talked about a lot of cool things, but one of the other reasons why this special interview is Dr. Nic, I don't know if you knew this or not, but your episode is my #1 listened to episode over the last year. So you're actually our most popular guest we've had on the show, which is...
Okay. Do I get a t-shirt
cool.
or something?
I was actually just talking about that with my mastermind crew about putting t-shirts together for guests that say, I'm a hero or something like that on them. So maybe you might actually get a t-shirt.
Okay. I'll keep a look at it. It'll be something arriving for me instead of my wife at the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who've been following along with our adventures, we are finally out of the repair shop. We spent 3 weeks there. We're now back on the road and moving along. So this first episode we've recorded not in a repair shop in a while on our travels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a quick introduction to Dr. Nic. He actually sent this over to me ahead of time. For those of you who don't know him, he's got all sorts of cool stuff. We'll get into his story a little bit here on the episode. But Dr. Nic is a former neuroscience and pain researcher, university lecturer, and author who's transformed himself into a sought-after mindset and performance coach for entrepreneurs and business leaders. You've consulted with some of the largest companies in the world, from health supplements, real estate, property and publishing, and software, as well as individual entrepreneurs, startups, business owners, and operators. Coached over 700 e-commerce store owners, thousands of health and fitness professionals, and consultants who run businesses online. And basically, he's living proof that his scientific approach to being extraordinary can work for anyone, which I'm pretty excited about to talk about a little bit today. Yeah, and I'm gonna skip over some of this and come down to the bottom here because I want to talk about this. You are a mindset coach, digital strategist, CEO of the X10Entrepreneur, and you say that the quality of thinking determines the quality of your life, which is your new business. And why we are bringing you back on to talk is a little bit about the new stuff that you're working on in your business. So why don't you start there and tell me a little bit about what X10Entrepreneur is and the business process for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a lot of entrepreneurs who have already got something going. That's mostly who I work with, people who've got something that's already operating. And the thing is, they just don't realize how stuck they are. Or they do actually. I mean, they often just rock up and they say to me, Nic, I know what to do, but I don't do it, or it's not working. What the F is wrong with me? That's the kind of thing. So when I was trying to look at who's the perfect avatar, it's someone who's sitting there going, what the is wrong with me? That's the kind of person I'm working with at the moment. And in fact, it's what I've been doing for about the last decade or so. And then before that, when I was consulting patients, when I was in practice, people in pain, similar kind of things. You'd have people who'd come, they had their life going on. I'd help them get out of pain. They'd go back into their life, but their life really wasn't what they wanted to be living. It wasn't really what they were doing. So I really became far more interested in helping people optimize their life as opposed to just helping them get out of pain. You know, that there's a big difference between just getting well again, but actually thriving. And because I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a professional, I tend to find myself working really well with that group of people. And it's all about 10x or X10 their life. And I can go into a bit of a story about the background to 10x thinking, by the way, that the kind of the originator of the idea. And that's why I've called it X10Entrepreneur, because it's not just about revenue, it's about their whole life being 10x'd, you know, which we can get into and talk about.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about all those things. I want to talk a little bit about, just because I think it's really fascinating, is this idea of transition in entrepreneurship. And I know that that running the X10Entrepreneur up again as sort of been a transition for you over this last year. I'm curious, from a meta level, how do you feel about doing that, making that kind of transition, and then what sort of, you know, as someone who's done that, some of your advice for other people who are transitioning their business or maybe changing directions?
Well, I think for me, you know, there was a certain direction I was finding myself wanting to go, but because of my involvement with other people, other businesses, you know, you're trying to satisfy, well, not satisfy, but live up to your responsibilities or commitments you've made to other people. And then that can begin to create that bit of a tug of war inside, where you've got that cognitive dissonance about what you feel like you really want to be doing versus what you're currently doing. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time in their life, whether they're in a career that they don't want, or maybe they initially wanted and now they don't want, or whether it's a business, there's that resistance that begins to appear, or that feeling inside. That's that tug of war. And you know, there's always opportunity cost from doing one or the other, and it's just a mental game that can play on your mind. Some days you've got the time to think about it. Other days you're just too busy in what you're doing to really give it the time it needs, and then all the effort you think it's going to take to have to put into transitioning back into what you want to do. All I can say, I guess, from my experience, having done this a number of times now, is that it always feels easier and better when you are answering that inner call to do what it is that you really want to do. And so even though it might feel like it's going to be a big leap, even though it might feel like there's a mountain to climb or an obstacle to climb, what you're doing is you're looking at the future and thinking, you know, that's going to be difficult or hard again, or am I going to have to start again, or whatever it is. But when you actually get over that initial decision, it then becomes easy, because you're actually working in alignment with what's kind of deep inside. So I guess the answer to the question is just take a moment, take half a day, take an hour for instance, you know, where you do nothing but actually sit and begin to contemplate, is the thing that's right in front of me right now that I'm doing, is it what's really fulfilling me, or what is this other thing inside that's prompting me to do something different?
Yeah, I'm actually in the process of making that kind of transition in my business right now. We chatted about a little bit ahead of time, was, you know, my push button podcast business that we're rolling out. And I'm in that spot where I have existing commitments with clients on the other business that I run, which is, you know, helping expert brands, you know, build and sell that kind of stuff. And it's like, I've also got this business that I'm building and growing. And I'm like, I have to worry about how do I keep all these commitments and spend this stuff down while still growing all of this. And I totally get that idea. It's like, you know, it's overwhelming, and it's kind of a hard thing to do, is to transition what you're doing. But I think, you know, to your point, answering that call and actually doing it and getting it done has been very fulfilling. But it's also like, it's taking a lot more time than I initially thought too, right? Like, you know, how long it takes to actually like accomplish a transition and keep everything satisfied and working, and, you know, not blowing everything up.
Yeah, I mean, again, when you take the first steps toward it, you can't predict what's going to happen, but there's definitely things you can do to make that goal more achievable, more certain, more feasible. And that's a lot of what I do with people, and I've had to do it for myself as well, is going, okay, this new thing that I want to do, how much do I really want to do it, and how feasible is it? A lot of people run into things without, especially answering that second part of the question, you know, how feasible it is. Sometimes it's very feasible, they just don't know how, or sometimes they think it's really feasible and they haven't done enough homework to find out it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of obstacles. Hey.
Yeah. I know that running into that is, that's the danger you run into in any sort of transition, is sometimes people get into, it's where you have like two sides to that. One is I've got something that's calling me and I need to actually go and do this and make it happen because there's opportunity and it's going to fulfill me. And then there's the other one is like, what I'm doing right now is hard and it looks like the grass is greener on the other side. Right. And that's like, sometimes you just need to push through and actually continue doing what you're doing. So my curiosity is, how do you know the difference between, like, you're just in a hard spot right now in your business and you need to push through and persevere, versus I've got something that's actually calling me and I really need to, do the research and make this transition?
Yeah, I guess drawing on the three really major transitions, and I think that's one of the things that crops up when I coach, especially professionals, because I've spoken to a lot of those who they're not really entrepreneurs. I mean, they're professionals. They've got their own business, but it's a local business, and they're getting paid time for, they're getting paid by the hourly rate. So it's not leveraged business, right? And it's a professional career, and they're in it, and it makes sense for them to keep doing that career. And so what they might do is dabble on the side. And so it's not like a major transition really in that case. A lot of them are still doing their big career. They're still earning their 6 figures a year or whatever it is, consulting. And then they try to build a business on the side. That's one thing. It's a different thing entirely to transition completely from one career to another, or from one business to another. And I've done that a couple of times. And each of those times, one was when I was in practice and I ended up selling. It was a physical location. I sold the practice. I quit my university job and then I went completely online. So that's a kind of major transition.
Yeah.
And it's happened a couple of other times as well. But each of those times, I've got to say, for me, it was a lot to do with my honesty and integrity to myself and my values. And I think that's what began to give me the urge inside to make what was that large transition, was that I felt like by continuing to go on the path I was on, I was going to start trampling on my own values about how I felt about myself and who I wanted to be. So I guess by continuing to go along the path that looked good, that had all the trappings, that made sense, that I'd spent work creating, and that started with good intentions, if I'd continued, it would have been going against my values. And so that was what I found I just couldn't tolerate. You only live once, right? And I thought, what's the point of me continuing to live a life where I'm not being the person who I want to be? So ultimately, that's what I think drove the major transitions for me, because it wasn't opportunistic. It wasn't like, oh, that sounds like a bit of a business, I might make more money there. The real transitions have come from that being true to what I feel like, who I want to be.
So like being
Do
true
you
to
relate to that?
Yeah, being true to yourself and really understanding it. Like, so the impetus for like my transition was realizing where my gift was, right? Like where you're, the zone of genius, so to speak. And we talk about it on the show all the time, the whole idea of having your superpower, right? And realizing that one of my the business that I've been running and making my revenue in, was based on derivatives of my skill set, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not a space that I can really innovate in, right? Because it's a derivative space for me. And realizing that I in the other area, I'm really in my zone of genius with being able to develop systems and processes and move things forward and have things that nobody else can have, because it's in my zone of genius, and be able to offer things to the market that way. And that was really the impetus for change, was realizing that, hey, this is more core to who I am, and lets me, like I said, offer innovation in the space that I wanted to be in. So anyways, I see where, that's where it was for me. It was an internal, like, core thing. I could feel it, and I knew I can feel the difference in working in one business as working in the other, because I know one of them is really, it's hitting on all cylinders, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the key thing about that as well, which is really interesting, you talk about innovation, is the Gallup Institute did a whole lot of research on entrepreneurs, and they came out with their view about entrepreneurship not being so much about innovation, but being about the ability to actually take an innovative idea and make profit from it, like find customers or find buyers for that innovation or that idea, and do so profitably. And of course, they speak to the fact that, a lot of American history, they talk about what a great place of innovation it is, but there's lots of innovative people who are broke, and the ideas never got off the ground. So being able to combine that innovation with also the entrepreneurial skill to actually create a profit from it, I mean, I think it's a real sweet spot to be able to have both of those kind of existing in one mind.
Yeah, and that was where I was really excited, because like for me, I noticed like in my area is the systems and processes, and we can actually, because of the process we've set up, we can accomplish in 2 hours what it takes normal people 8 hours to accomplish, or 10 hours. So the innovation is in a time savings, and that time savings is really valuable to the market, right? So we can have both. The innovation is what leads to the market for my particular spot where we're looking at, which lends itself nicely to hitting both of those, both sides of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Is both innovation and actually having a product or service and bringing it to market. And I'm actually at the point now where like we've had our first couple of test clients, and now I have to actually like go to the market and see if we actually can generate sales. So, you know, our current clients are paying and they're happy and they're liking it, but they were very, very warm. So we're going to have to see how it goes when we actually go to the cold market with our innovations, and see what the next steps are.
Yeah, I mean, that's the exciting part, right?
Yeah, that's the it's the
Exciting and
gut-wrenching
scary
part.
at the same time.
Exciting and scary. And yeah, to your point, you talk a lot about moving your business forward. Blocks that I find myself running into is, I know we're right at that precipice where we have to start going to the market. And I've got a couple of things I need to get finished before we can go to market. And I find myself wanting to procrastinate on those, because I know when I finish them, I have to go to the market. And that's scary. A bit of scariness is causing me to procrastinate. So if I was your patient, how would you doctor me?
Well, like I think what happens is when you get that feeling inside, that bit of fear, what we often do is, like you say, we procrastinate, and I can relate to that, having done that very thing a lot of times myself. And one of the really fascinating things that I do with my clients is actually investigate what that feeling is, what that fear is, because we can kind of go with this idea. It's an aspect of you. It's part of you, right? And so instead of it, trying to push it away or ignore it, or just let it sit there, if you investigate it, what I'm pretty sure we could cut through like an hour or two of a session together and understand that fear has a goal for you. And if you were to kind of go through and understand what its goal for you is, if we were to personify it, right, as some other thing, it's got a goal for you. And you'd find that the goal for you would be incredible success. The goal it would have for you would be to have a massively positive impact on the people who you can serve with this project. And so if you could, translate yourself past the initial blockage of the feeling of the fear, and that's what I do with people when I work with them, is to help them completely reframe what this fear is. And then it kind of dissolves into an energetic drive to actually go ahead and do what needs to be done, to focus on those tasks that normally get put aside or left aside because of the fear. When you completely understand the fears on your side, and it's got a really altruistic goal for you and the people that you serve, then it does dissolve. Because if you just stay at that superficial level of the fear, which is a real feeling, right? But when you investigate it, it really can dissolve and become an ally to you getting stuff done, as opposed to an obstacle.
So when you talk about investigating a fear, how do you actually like do that? Like find out in your head, like what's causing the fear and what's the actual stuff behind it? Like how do you actually do that kind of investigation?
Yeah. Okay. So if we were to take you, for example, what is the underlying concept or idea that is behind the fear? If you were to just take a moment to think about what it was.
So the thing that pops into my head is like, if I'm going to go to market, and like it's weird because I know it's not true in my head, but like in my heart I still feel it. Is that if I go to market, people are going to be like, no, this isn't a good service. I don't see any reason why I could do this. I could just do this myself, that kind of thing. And all those things are true, right? They could do themselves, but what we're doing is we're helping to save them, a significant amount of time. And, for me, like my podcast never would have gotten to where it is today, right? On our, 90th or 100th episode and, growing, if I didn't have the systems in place, because I didn't like doing all the other work. And I've noticed a lot of other podcasters are the same way. They don't like all the work that goes in after you hit the stop record button. And if they could just do the part that they loved and have someone else handle everything else, they would be able to get their message to the market a lot better. So like, I know that in my head, but in my heart, I keep feeling this, like, if I, when I bring it to market, people are just going to be like, nope, I can do it myself. It's not worth the money. It's not that thing. I know that's all a bunch of bull crap, but in my head, that's where I keep going. So I see that fear, and it's, it hasn't stopped me, but at the same time, it has caused me to procrastinate a bit on the last couple of things we need to get finished.
But see, so what tends to happen, the reason we feel an emotion like fear is we feel it in our body. I mean, when you think about it for a moment, do you actually feel that emotion as a sensation in your body, even if it's small?
Yeah. It feels like a tightness right around here in
Yeah.
your chest, or, like a dropping in your gut or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the body. We call that a behavioral response. So that's your body behaving in an automatic way. When you then begin to feel that, and your conscious awareness becomes aware of it, you then recognize that as fear, and then you intellectualize it, or we do. We intellectualize it, and we think, oh, that's right. Maybe I'm feeling this fear because other people might think that they can do this already, or they won't find the value in it, or whatever. So let's just, in the order of the way things go, let's go behavioral response of your gut. Then you become aware of what it is, and then you think about it. What I want you to do is to think right back to past what it would be that's stimulating that initial gut feeling to happen in the first place. What's the underlying concept? It might not be described in intellectual words, but just as a general concept, what's the underlying concept that is triggering that kind of gut feeling?
Rejection, probably.
Do you see how that's different than intellectualizing it with the other things about it, like, oh, it makes sense, they might think they can already do it. It really comes down to rejection.
Yeah.
And so then you begin to look at that rejection side of it and investigate that. And you begin to say, okay, if you were to take it, if you were, forget about the business even for a minute, just for a minute, think about, if someone says no to you, are you still okay?
Yeah, we're fine.
So then you would say to yourself, okay, so if I'm fine, is my body's natural behavioral response here to the idea of rejection, is that actually a valid, I mean, it's a real response, but is that the response? If I'm actually going to be okay with someone saying no. And of course, we can't dive into too much here, but that's the kind of thing you begin to do, because when you investigate rejection and you have a talk about it, and there's processes we can do as well that help to kind of speed this up. But you understand that you're totally okay if someone says no. In fact, they're entirely entitled to say no. They're a sovereign individual. They can say no, just like you're a sovereign individual who can do your business. You are allowed to launch your business and make the offer. They're allowed to say no. If they say no, you're going to be okay. So if you're going to be okay, and you think about also what's driven you to do this in the very first instance, like the goal of all of this is to serve those people. It's fairly obvious thing to say, because is your goal to not serve them?
No, it's definitely to serve them and make their life better and easier and get their message out further.
Exactly right. So you can feel really comfortable about the integrity and the goodwill around this offer that you want to make, and also know that you're going to be totally okay if they say no. And also, it's completely their choice about whether they say no or not. And so when you do that and you begin to unpack this thought of rejection is actually what's the fallacy, or the thought that you're not going to be okay, that something's going to go bad if they reject you, because you'll discover that it's actually not. And you could actually look back in your life and find lots of times when people have said no and you're actually okay. In fact, the question becomes now, can you ever remember a time when someone rejected you and you actually weren't okay?
Yeah, probably not.
And even if you had someone rejected you and you felt bad for a while, if you were to go back and examine that time, you'd still find that even though you felt bad for a while, you were actually still okay. Like, you as a person were actually okay.
Yeah. Like, so, the story that pops up in my head was I had a fiance who gave me the ring back when we were much younger, and that was a big rejection. And it took me a couple of years to get over it, but I was fine and probably actually better for it.
That's the really fascinating thing, because our brain and our memory, like all of those things, all of those rejections in the past, of course, they're all just in the past, and they kind of exist in our mind as neural circuits that we then recreate in the present. So that when you then are going to go and launch a business and you get that feeling, it's the same gut feeling that you get if someone you care about says no to you, right? And so all of that doesn't come back consciously. You're not intellectualizing that, but the emotional drive is the same kind of drive. You have a memory, this kind of anchored memory of that rejection. And so that's why investigating the idea of rejection is really fascinating, because then you go back and go, hang on, really what I'm doing is I'm not saying this is exactly the case in your situation, right? But you go, really what's happening is I'm feeling this rejection, but it's also drawing on this memory of when I got rejected in that way. And so now I'm allowing that other situation entirely to have an impact on the way I'm feeling about launching my business.
Yeah, so it's like it's like something your brain was, pathways that were trained a long time ago that are just automatically being called forth again, whether or not they're actually relevant to the current situation.
I had a client who was starting a business where she needed to go on video. She's very successful in her other career, but she was starting an online business, needed to go on video. And when it came to video, she just could not do it. Yet her whole business needed her to be in video. And so she'd been to a video, like a TV coach, who gets people ready to go on TV and do interviews and that type of thing. And that hadn't worked, etc. And, without having to do any big psychoanalysis, it came back to when she was in grade 3 at primary school. She was always the girl who got the top mark in class. And she rocked up one day with an assignment and handed it in, so proud that she'd done it, not realizing that she was also then supposed to give a presentation. And she stood in front of the class speechless and just felt so embarrassed about standing in front of people to give a talk that she didn't know what to say. And that was what came up for her. And when we resolved that and just investigated that and talked about it, she realized she was pretty much letting that non-conscious memory, so to speak, create a lot of fear and anxiety around just being in front of a camera and being in front of people. And after that, she was really able to just go ahead and shoot video. I mean, there was still the skills to learn to do that. Let's just call it the normal nerves around being in front of a camera, but it wasn't amplified by this other unrelated but very relevant fear that she had. Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned when we first started talking about this that you can, once you sort of investigate it, you can transition it and turn it into the driving force behind actually getting your shit done. So how do you make sort of that change?
Well, there's a couple of ways to approach it. One way is the way I kind of already described, where you investigate what this thing wants for you. What's its goal for you? And you ask yourself that question, like, what is the goal of the fear? And we could pretty much say, in your case, it's to protect you from being rejected, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can ask yourself, okay, well, let's just say that I'm not going to be rejected, or that if I get rejected, I'm going to be okay. What's the next goal? What's the next higher goal? And begin to go through a process of that. You can sit down with a sheet of paper and actually kind of go through the steps. Like, okay, well, what's the next highest goal for it? Well, the next goal would be then, and I'm just going to, make it up in my head, but it could be something like, well, I want to be safe. It wants me to be safe, right? Okay, so let's just say that you're safe and you're going to be okay again. So that's resolved. That's cool. What would the next goal be? Well, the next goal would be for me to take a risk. Okay. And so let's just say you took the risk and that was done. What would be the next goal? And you might go, well, really, ultimately, it's I want to provide for my family and do what I love to do and be in my zone of genius, right? Okay. So if that was done, if that was achieved, what would be the next goal? And then, you might come up with something like, well, really why I'm here is to ultimately serve my clients, to help them have a great outcome. Okay. And what's the goal? If you did that, what's the goal for that? Well, my clients are also having a great outcome. So my influence through them to the people they influence becomes huge. And you can see how what starts out as fear of rejection, if you were to analyze it, you end up with a goal that gets to its highest point, and you begin to realize that this fear ultimately has a goal for you that is almost, the opposite of what you conceived of at the beginning. And then when you understand that, you go, right, so really that's what I'm driven to do. And you get anchored to that higher goal. And to bring in a bit of neuroscience as well, your frontal lobe, the decision-making part of your frontal lobe makes far better commitments when there's cognitive dissonance. So what we know from goal setting, or what I call success setting, is, because I just like to name things differently, right, is that people who indulge just fantasizing about what they want in the future, their chance of success isn't that great. It's the same as people who just dwell on the present and what's going wrong. They don't have much of a chance for success. But when you actually do this process called mental contrasting, which is where you really have a great idea of what the future goal is, and you look at the current situation, and what needs to be done to get to that goal, even just those two are kind of opposites, right? There's where you are now and the obstacles you're facing, and there's where you want to be, which is nice and successful and happy. That dissonance, or that contrast, that duality, helps your brain make more lasting and stronger commitments to actually doing the outcome. So that's why that one process I've described there is a great way of doing that, because you start out analyzing and looking at this fear, and instead of being afraid of it or just trying to will it away with willpower and bravado and massive action and all that sort of stuff people talk about, by investigating it and going through a step process like that, you end up getting to a much higher goal that helps you neutralize its negative impact and turn it into that energizing factor. So that's just one approach that you can use to help.
That's really fascinating. That's probably like the most fascinating 10 minutes I've had in a long time talking about fear, because like we talk all the time in business about putting things to their highest and best use. Right. And, investment community, that's very, very common, right? You buy a house and you fix it up and make it right. You're trying to get it to its highest and best use. And, when we talk about being a CEO, figuring out what your zone of genius is and putting each of your people and yourself in your zone of genius, it's all about being in the highest and best use. And you're talking about like all the way down to like when you have a fear, like that fear has a highest and best use, and you can sort of elevate it. Right. And that's what we were talking about, is how do you, what's your body's and your mind's goal for that fear, and really taking it out to the, to its highest and best use. And you find out that really the reason you have that fear in the first place is because it's trying to get you or help you get to that place of success. You're reframing it.
Oh, exactly right. And so it's not trying to force positive thinking, because you don't sit there and go, right, I'm not going to investigate the fear. I will be successful. I will be successful, right? Because that doesn't investigate the fear. That just uses willpower, and willpower is a limited resource, which is why people run out of it and then go back to, alternating back and forward between fear and trying to use willpower and getting back on the horse and off and on, back and forward. Investigating it helps to resolve it and gives you a much greater sense of self-awareness around why you might even have these feelings in the first place, and also can substantially elevate the goal, which is the key thing I find with people. Often they'll come in and they'll have a goal, a stated goal. You ask them what they want and they'll tell you. When they go through a process like this that originates with a fear, they end up finding that they have a goal that they are far more switched on about, that's far more desirable, because they expand out what that goal really is. And it's greater than what they started with. And that's another really key indicator of success is if you've got a goal that is highly desirable, you are far more likely to achieve it than if you've got a goal that's only somewhat desirable. Kind of makes sense. But even though it makes sense, of all the entrepreneurs I've coached so far doing this, none of them start out with the goal that they then end up with, right? Which is a goal that is far more energizing for them and for their brain, and then for the leader they need to be with the people they want to take with them on this journey. So expanding that goal, understanding the fear that you've got, the obstacle that's there, dissolving that just makes the whole process far more fun, a lot more enjoyable, and far more likely to succeed, right?
Yeah, I can already see I'm going to have to spend a couple hours here with my notepad and write some things down about some of those, because it's interesting that like you run into fears all the time in your business, and a lot of times, like to your point, those of us who have achieved success, sometimes we just power through them because we have willpower. But you've given me and hopefully our listeners a tool that shows you how to actually work with that and actually use it to elevate yourself. Which is really, really fascinating. So I want to transition a little bit and talk about, how does what we just talked about fit into what you do with X10Entrepreneur?
So what happens is people have a goal for their business, and because I'm working with entrepreneurs, and the goal for their business isn't necessarily just revenue related. It's very often around their life, because they got into this because of the kind of life they imagined they might be able to have. And while they've created a successful business, they either haven't reached the business goals that they want, or they've got the business goals but haven't achieved the life they wanted to achieve. And so that's why they're kind of perplexed, because they're high performers, they've achieved stuff in their life, and often very successful in the past, and then they find themselves in this situation, and they come to me because I do a session with them that really establishes where they are on the map. You know, I mean, and my analogy here is this: if you're lost in the wilderness and someone gives you a map but it doesn't have an X that says you are in this spot, it doesn't matter if you've got a map if you don't know where you are, right? And so a lot of people do not have an honest understanding of where they are. And what's fascinating is one of the reasons they don't have an honest understanding of where they are is because of the fear they have around acknowledging where they are, right? Because they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to acknowledge their health, for example. Like they might be overweight. They don't want to acknowledge it. They might not be going to the gym anymore, or they might be eating bad. They don't want to acknowledge it. They might be just pushing through and just not getting enough sleep at all over a long period of time. They don't want to acknowledge it. They might be being really shitty and being an asshole to their partner or their other business partners or whatever it is, and they really don't want to acknowledge it because they want to be right. And so because of this fear of being wrong, or fear of admitting or looking bad or whatever it is, they don't take stock. They don't admit to themselves. But see, even using the word admit, if you reframe the fear, then you're not admitting anything. You don't even need to use that language. You're just identifying where you are on the map so that you can then navigate your way out. And then that's essentially what I help them do. So the way my business is structured, I have this intensive, it's called the X10 Intensive, and it goes for 8 weeks. And we start out with everyone going through this process so they understand where they are on the map, exactly where they want to be in a way I described, which is a goal that is so desirable that every part of their being is aligned with getting the goal. We also go through and understand how that goal could be feasible for them. So not just possible, but possible for them. And it's a really fascinating exercise to do, because what I've discovered in every single person I do this with is that they can't describe all the steps they're going to need to take to hit that goal. There's all these blank spots. And that's why, you know, even if you map that out on a month by month basis, they'll go blank spot, blank spot. That's why you can hit a month and nothing gets done for a whole month, because it was just a big blank spot in their mind about not knowing what to do. And that's not a mindset thing. That's literally a skills-based thing that you can help people recognize as well. Like, I just don't know what to do. I thought I knew how to do a webinar, but it's been a week, a month, and I still haven't got it done because I really don't know how to structure it. Do you see how that's a skill-based thing?
Yeah.
And if you don't recognize what that is, how can you plan to get it solved? You know, so that's what we do, and then we begin to implement. So at the end of 6 weeks, not only do they have a plan that they highly desire, that is entirely feasible, we also clear up a bunch of mindset stuff that always shows up along the way. And then they're kind of set and in momentum to tackle whatever goal it is that they set. And then I can continue working with them to help them implement that plan, or they go ahead themselves and do it themselves.
Reminds me of like I went into the new business that I'm running with Push Button Podcasts, and like looking at like the things that I know I'm going to need to do, and like thinking about blank spots, right? I was like, one of the other fears that I have is I recognized blank spots. It's like, I know when we hit X number of clients and I've got all this written down, I'm going to need to hire a project manager. And then I'm going to need to hire someone who's like, you know, I'm going to need to work on team expansion and stuff like that. And I'm like, I didn't know anything about building team culture, and I don't know anything about hiring and growing a team that way. And I'm like, I know there's all these processes in my head that I'm like, I don't have anything for those yet. And, so like my process for that was like, I recognized that I had blank spots, and I started being like, okay, well, the first one is I need to look at culture, because I've got a couple of staff members now. If we can figure that out at the beginning, hopefully we can keep it as we grow. And I reached out to someone who knew something about culture, and spent a couple hours on the phone with them, and, you know, what kind of things do they do, especially with a dispersed team, and like working through that. But I know that I'm going to have to do that over and over again, because like, as I'm growing this, I'm like, I know about half of what I need to do, and the other half I've got no clue. So,
but what's really interesting about that, and it applies to so many areas of life, is that people will often attempt to do something something audacious like start a new business. And, people always love to quote the statistics, don't they? Like 10% of businesses fail, or only 4% are, after 10 years or whatever. And so that kind of negative social proof is always this kind of predictive force in our lives that almost, setting us up to fail. And so then when the business doesn't go according to plan or something fails, it can be easy for people to take that personally. Like I don't deserve success. I'm not good enough to be successful. But they don't say this. I didn't have this very specific skill to create culture, and that's why I failed. They don't say that. They bring it inside and they internalize it as some kind of personality trait, right? I'm not an entrepreneur. I can't do it or whatnot. And what's really important is to be able to do what you said is like, well, okay, it's not a personality defect. I literally just don't know how to do this skill, right? I don't know how to throw a fishing wire into the river. So I just have to learn how to do that, and I'm going to be able to fish. And that's really important to do, to recognize that, because then it doesn't overwhelm you and create a bunch of negativity, and it identifies what skills to go and do. And I bet you that we could go and run through your down history lane through you and find lots of examples in your life where you learned stuff you didn't know before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's one of the things that I find most fascinating, and it's interesting because it's both a fear and it's a motivator for me, at least. When I look forward and I'm like, I see a blank spot there, because I'm like, I don't know how to do that, and that's scary. But on the second part of that is I really like learning new things. So that's I'm one of those people, and we talked about this on our last episode actually, is we're the kind of people that like we like to learn the things, and then once we've learned the thing, we don't care anymore. So we have to have systems in place to actually get things implemented, because the actual learning is sort of our what do you call it? Being addicted to learning new things was our fatal flaw.
No, that's exactly right. And the thing too, you mentioned fear again. I know it's been a bit of a theme since we started, but the whole idea of being fearless is never made sense to me at all. I mean, we're talking about millions of years of evolution where our brain has evolved a highly attuned system of fear. We've got fear circuits in our brain. We have neurochemicals in our brain that are designed to that. So the whole idea to be fearless never made sense to me. It's like the positive thinking thing. It's like, oh, fear's bad, therefore I'm going to willpower my way to being fearless. Whereas what you end up doing is investigating the fear and understanding it. And then what you've described is a perfect thing there. It's this dichotomy or this duality between a fear and also a motivation. And the two are kind of linked together. And that's a way we approach this thing too. One of the ways we've talked about, right, is to understand what the highest goal for the fear or other emotion is. Another way is to actually understand that you can't have fear without whatever its opposite might be. And so in your case there, you had fear and its opposite was motivation, but you could have fear and love, or fear and hope. And you can't have one without the other. It's like black and white. You can't have night without day.
Yeah, you can't have the head side of the coin without the tail side, right?
Yeah, exactly right. When you can sit comfortably with both of them, rather than trying to force yourself to be in one and avoid the other, that is a futile exercise that people spend decades, expending their energy trying to do. And the real breakthrough is being able to experience and understand both, yet not be really anchored to either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to bring up something else you mentioned too, which was knowing where you are on the map and acknowledging where you're at, right? And part of that is knowing where your blank spots are in the future. But just to your point, I've been working with a body doctor, right? You're a brain doctor. I've been working with a body doctor about achieving peak performance in just your physical body, and how that would affect your output as an entrepreneur. And one of the first things that he did, and it sounds like you do the same thing with your clients, was he did baseline testing. It was like, we did blood testing that was like all the way down to the microscope level of every individual cell and what the healthier cell walls look like, and DNA testing and a bunch of other stuff. And we did food logs and other things, and discovered like, you have to know where you are, right? And it's like, found out, I've got a lower white count that I'm supposed to have. Right. It's not, none of it, like if it was, normal blood testing, it was like, it would have checked all the green boxes. I'm a healthy individual. But like when you look down all the way down at the minutia, it's like, hey, your trend line is actually going this direction. Right. And, parasite level is a little higher than it should be. And your toxic level is higher than it should be. And your testosterone level is not as high as it should be. And that kind of stuff. Like, he's like, all of those things at this point, you're a healthy 34, 35-year-old man, but the trend line is down. He's like, what we need to do is we need to figure out how you create the trend line this direction. But the point was, you have to know where you are on the map if you're going to change the journey you're going, right? Like to actually like map out where you're going to go next.
It sounds so obvious, but it seems to escape so many of us. You know, it's escaped me before in the past too. You know?
But yeah, it seems very obvious that that's what you would do. But like to your point, people are afraid of acknowledging that, right? Acknowledging finding out where they're at. And I remember when we first started out with that, he had me do the blood test, had me do the DNA testing, and I remember feeling very fearful of finding out where I was. Right. Being afraid is like, you know, if you're getting all this blood testing stuff and find out, you know, you're going to find out all sorts of stuff like where your cancer levels are and parasite levels and toxic levels and like the health of every individual blood cell kind of thing. And, you know, I found all sorts of things like my blood cells, you know, your red blood cells are supposed to be like perfectly circular and mine are like lemon shaped. And he's like, there's reasons for that, causes for that in your diet and lifestyle and that kind of stuff. And we can fix it. But I remember before we got the results back for the test being like, oh my God, it's like, I'm going to find out the day I'm going to die. Right. Is like the fear that was in my head. And, which is, you know, it's kind of ridiculous, but like, that's the way that the fear was in my head was like, oh man, I'm going to learn all these things about my health and my body. And what ended up happening was the opposite. You find out that it's really freeing to know exactly where you are and exactly what you need to do to move forward to get where you want to be. Right. And it's interesting that we have a fear of finding out where you're at now, right, on the map, so to speak, and how, like, I don't know what the analogous of that is, but like when you actually go through it and find out here's where I am, you find out that it's not actually something that you're afraid of. It's something that actually frees you and lets you move forward.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think we could probably kind of theorize and wonder about why that is the case. And I think for me, really, I mean, we've all got, you know, when you compare our brains to the brains of, you know, animals with much smaller brains, reptilian brains, and you know, the whole spectrum, is that we share exactly the same brain structure as them. We just got more and more layered on top. So if you do take the view that we've kind of, our brains have evolved or developed over time, it's not like we somehow got a different brain than a reptile or a cow, right, or a cat or something like that. We have a brain that's layered on top of that. So we've got all that functionality that's very in the moment. You know, those other forms of life just exist very much in the present. They don't have the hardware in their brain to even project out and have a goal about a year away from now and exactly what they're going to do. And so that's the really interesting thing, is that's why we have these drives to satisfy our existing, you know, needs right now in the moment. We want to satisfy them. And we've got the dissonance then, because we've got this additional ability to think about the impact of that behavior on us in the long term. And so because that's part of what it is. So that's the way I now understand all those pictures I remember seeing as a kid, where you'd have the angel and the devil on the shoulders whispering different things in the ear. They're really just different parts of our brain that each have a completely legitimate desire. There's nothing wrong or right about it. I'm hungry right now. I want to eat that thing. That happens to be the food in front of me right now. I want to do it. Or, you know, there's an opportunity to make money right now. It's really easy. I'm going to take this opportunity. Whereas it might be unethical, or it might not be really serving the people. You know, there's not a win-win situation. And so then he comes in with this other thought about, well, hang on, in the future, this is the kind of person I want to be. This behavior right now isn't going to serve that. And so we do end up with this kind of ping pong, this dualities back and forward going in our minds. You know, and if you throw on top of that this recognition as well of our mortality, which I know you kind of said sounds ridiculous, but it's actually not. I mean, you know, think about all the fear that's going on in the world right now around mortality and viruses and all that sort of stuff. It's a very real threat that we face all the time, and it's very natural for us to be concerned about it. Depending on what else is going on in our life, whether we know someone who's just died in a car accident, or someone I know my age who's just died of a brain tumor, you know, and so when you throw that as well, it's all these non-conscious, often they're non-conscious fears that are legitimate as well, that go uninvestigated, but that also create the atmosphere that we have in our brain, the mindset we have, or the state of being that we're in. when we're just trying to start and launch a new business. All of those things bring to bear on what's going on for us internally.
Yeah, it is amazing to me to sort of really get into like how your brain structure works. I've been reading Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, and I feel like that's a masterclass in persuasive psychology for yourself.
What do you like? What stuck out for you most about
so
what she cut out
so
there?
the thing that stuck out to me, the thing that has stuck out to me most so far was this idea of the duality of existence, right? And so you talked a little bit about the duality in our brains, and he talked about how it goes all the way down through like every story and structure of our universe. Like everything you can get into has a duality to it. And he's like, even if you get into the Christian stories of, God the creator and the evil forces in the world, and you have these arguments that go on in theology about, if God was good, why did he create evil? And the reality is, in any of these stories, you can't, like, God can't exist without an other, right? Like, otherwise he is like, there's always got to be a duality, right? There's got to be, if there is God, there has to be the other side. And so you have the picture of good, the picture of evil, and like you can't have one without the other. And realizing, like, so we've talked a little bit about that here with the the fear has its opposite, and you can't have one without the other. And realizing that goes down into the very fabric of our being, is that like a coin isn't a coin if it only has a head, right? Like there is no such thing as a coin without another side. Right. So there's always the duality. And I found that really, really fascinating, because it was the first time that I'd had someone like drive it down into every aspect of your life and universe and understanding your stories, and like all the way down to like your mythology that's built our culture. Everything has that duality to it. And that was really, really fascinating.
You'll find that if you were to examine your life or the lives of other people, that virtually all struggle comes from them, people bouncing back and forward between some duality that's anchored in their mind. I'm loved, I'm not loved. I'm worthy, I'm not worthy. I'm good enough, I'm not good enough. Money's good, money's evil. It's just a constant duality. And back to your point about the kind of, the different religious aspects. When you think about kind of Chinese philosophy, you've got the yin and the yang, and they're together in that kind of thing. But the idea is that you can't have one without the other. And when you understand that and you're at peace with both, that's the Tao, that's the one path. And the way I've come to understand that kind of Garden of Eden story is that, you had this concept, this idea that there was good and evil, which is the tree of knowledge. But in the story, right, Adam and Eve exist outside of it. Even though the duality was there, they exist outside of it. And when they were outside of it, that's when things were going well. That's when there was peace. In the same way, in that kind of Chinese tradition, that when you have too much of one or too much of the other of a certain duality, you're out of balance. But when you have both in balance, that's when you can find the one kind of path. Now, bringing all that forward into a neuroscience and integrated brain kind of approach is the same thing. Like you've to bring up something really specific, there's an area of your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, and its role is error detection. It's like the accountant in the brain. Is one version, or the little judge, and it's looking for errors all the time. So if that area of the brain becomes really hyperactive and really well trained, then you can begin to find error with everything. That becomes your filter for life, is finding, is that wrong or right? And of course, then we've got emotional engagement with whether things are wrong or right. If something's wrong, it's bad. If something's right, it's good. And so everything gets layered around this wrong or right, which is, again, another duality. Whereas you can learn processes that activate the forebrain that really quieten that area of the brain down, so you can begin to think and operate in a creative part of the forebrain that's more active, with this other area being quieter, that allows much more creative, optimistic thought, where people are much more chilled out, much more able to remain calm in stressful situations. And that, to me, is the kind of modern day neurological understanding of the difference between being stuck in one duality or the other, or beginning to rise out of that struggle. They're always still there, but not having to be stuck in that struggle, you know.
Yeah. It was the other thing that really struck me as cool about like really diving in and understanding duality was that like if you look down all the way down to like our cellular level, like we are male and female kind of thing. There's a duality there, and there like everything in our life, even our brain, like our brain is separated into two halves. And yeah, and if you look at like every structure in that lives, right, all living things have a male and female portion to them. They all have a duality. So it's really fascinating to understand that like that actually has an impact, and then you have to learn how to look at and filter your life through, like you have to have both sides, right? You can't have courage without fear, right? And you can't have you can't have love without hate, and you can't have all these things. You have to sort of understand where they fit in. And it gets all the way down to like nitty gritty of like copywriting. When you talk about copywriting for your business, one of the things they teach you is you have to find out where your person wants to be, like where they want to go and where they want to get away from, right? And you have to help take them through that journey from the opposites, things like that. So it really fits into everything. So anyways, I found that whole concept really fascinating.
It is. It permeates everything we do. Not just in business, but our life, the banking system, economics, political structures, the legal system. It permeates everything.
Yeah, order and chaos, right?
Yeah, zeros and ones, and the way the internet works.
That's why why computers are cool. They're all binary, right? And our whole being is binary. So it's been an incredibly fascinating conversation, just in terms of like how our brains work and how that how you can use neuroscience to really understand and grow your business. So my curiosity for you, Nic, is sort of to wrap up this follow-up interview. What is it where can people come to get this kind of work done with you? Do you have like an X10 entrepreneurship program that you put people through? Or is it a book? Do you have a book launch coming up, podcast? Like what kind of things do you have that teach people these concepts so they can apply them in their business and really start growing?
Look, there's my website, which is niclucas.com, but the X10Entrepreneur.com website is where they can go to find out about that sort of stuff. But also just connect with me on Facebook. Honestly, that's one of the main places I interact with people, because most of the people coming through into that intensive are people who have either become referred or they've come to know me by observing just how I am, on Facebook. I think one of the most important things a leader can do is to lead by example. And so often I'll have people who'll say, I've been following you on Facebook for 6 months and I got to see you with a real deal, because in our particular line of work, right, there's a lot of people who have a lot of promises and a lot of people say certain things. And so you really want to take the time to get to know someone and see that they're authentic, that they're kind of, walking the talk, so to speak. And so that's what I always encourage people to do. There's no rush, right? Unless you absolutely feel a rush and you want to reach out now, but otherwise just connect on Facebook and hang around. That would be probably one of the best ways.
Yeah. And or invite him onto a podcast and have him doctor you for free and learn a whole bunch of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
that's my plan.
That's the thing.
So
I was just going to say, have you struggled with another duality, which is being anonymous versus being a public figure?
Yes, I actually struggle with that currently, because for a number of reasons, right? So I don't particularly like being a public figure, and I am not naturally an extroverted person, right? They have words for it. Like I'm a trained extrovert. I've learned how to be an extrovert but I don't particularly like it. And I don't like people like knowing all of my stuff. I have a hard time even sharing the stuff that we're doing on our travels with family and friends, stuff like that. Because I don't particularly care for everyone to know. But at the same time, like I also see the benefit of it for my business. And like I see, if I'm going to be a leader, I'm going to be a thought leader. And if you don't get in front of people and share the message, right, you have to actually do that. So yeah, I definitely struggle with that.
Yeah. Well, and that's something I have struggled with as well. But I am on a mission to share my message as well. So that's why it's been so cool to be able to jump on this podcast with you again, begin to share what I'm doing. I just think it's really important information that can be of massive help to people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, I can already see just like if if you were listening to this and you paid attention to how you can reframe fears and bring them to their highest and best use, I think that is just gold um, for people like me who are really pushing and growing their businesses and get stuck in places. Because a lot of the stuckedness, it's all up here, and you can reframe it and move forward.
Yeah, absolutely can. Yeah.
Cool. So thank you, Joe, Nick, really appreciate it. And for those of you who are listening, let me know what you thought of this sort of show format for bringing on a guest a second time. We didn't really have an outline for this discussion. We just wanted to get in and really talk about what it is that Nick does on a real world kind of basis. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well, Nick. But yeah, absolutely. We're glad to have you back on as another hero on our show.
That's awesome. Thanks for having me again.
So to wrap this up, do you have any final words of wisdom you want to pass on to our listeners before we hit that stop record button?
Yeah, I do. And I didn't come up with this, but I really like it. And it's that where you'll be in a year from now isn't based on what you know, it's based on how you think. So pay attention to thinking about thinking, because that's where the gold lies.
Yeah, that's what is it? Henry Ford says, thinking is the hardest work there is. That's why so few people do it.